So how do you solve a simple one-step equation? Now, when I ask you to solve an equation, what I'm really looking for is to figure out what x must be to make this equation true. In other words, what is this number such that when you add it to 2, you get 5? So that means here, x must be 3, because 3 plus 2 equals 5. Now that was a very easy equation to solve. But when I ask you to solve the equation algebraically, here's how you do it. To solve an equation, we need to isolate for the variable x. We're going to get x by itself. Right now, x is being added with 2. So how do you remove something that says adding by 2? The opposite of adding by 2 is to subtract by 2. But because of this equal sign, whatever you do to the left side of the equal sign, you must also do the same thing to the other side of the equal sign. That way, your equation is balanced. If you subtract 2 from this side, you must also subtract 2 from the other side. So notice that 2 minus 2 is 0. So that's why we only have x on this side. But what's 5 minus 2 on this side? 5 minus 2 is in fact 3. And that's what we got. 3 makes sense because 3 plus 2 has to equal 5. So 3 is our solution. Now let's go ahead and try this equation. Some number minus 4 has to equal 9. So what is that number? Well, same thing. We're going to solve for x algebraically. To do that, we're going to get x by itself. But x right now is being subtracted by 4. So how do you remove something that says subtract by 4? We're going to do the opposite of minusing 4. The opposite of minusing 4 is to add by 4. But again, if I add 4 to the left side of the equal sign, you must add 4 to the other side of the equal sign. That way, the equality or the equation is balanced. So, what do we have now? Well, negative 4 plus 4 or minus 4 plus 4 has to be 0, so that goes away, and the only thing we have left is now x. But what is 9 plus 4? 9 plus 4 now is 13. Now let's check to see if that equation makes sense, or if that solution makes sense. 13, if I plug it into x right here, 13 minus 4 is in fact 9. So this solution is correct. Now what about this equation? Now this equation is slightly different than the previous two examples. Before, we were adding 2 to x or subtracting 4 from x, but this time x is being multiplied by 2. So x is being doubled in this case. So what's opposite of doubling by 2? We want to get x by itself again. So we want to get rid of something that says timesing by 2 or doubling by 2. So the opposite or the inverse operation of doubling by 2 is actually dividing by 2 or cutting in half. To divide that by 2 is actually just 1. So we only have 1x left because 2 divided by 2 is 1x. So again, we have to divide by 2 on the other side as well to keep the equation balanced. So what is 8 divided by 2? 8 divided by 2 is in fact 4. Now let's double check if that actually makes sense. 2 times some number gives us 8. So what is that number? Has to be 4, because 2 times 4 is in fact 8. So the solution is now 4. Now here's one last example. This time, x is not being multiplied by 2, x is now being divided by 2. Now some number divided by 2 equals to 5. So let's go ahead and isolate for that variable x. Let's get x by itself, just like the other previous examples. So to get x by itself, we want to remove something that says divide by 2. But what is opposite of cutting something in half? Opposite of dividing by 2. Now the inverse operation, or the opposite of dividing by 2, is in fact multiplying. by 2. But you can't, again, just multiply by 2 on the left side of the equal sign. You must also do the exact same thing to the right side of the equal sign as well to make sure that the equation is balanced. So let's just double check. 2 times something that says divide by 2, well, 2 divided by 2 is again 1. So then x is by itself in this case. But what is 5 times 2? 5 times 2 is then 10. Now let's just double check to see if that actually works. If I take this x and substitute it here, what is 10 divided by 2? 10 divided by 2 is in fact 5. So this is a correct solution. And there you go. So just to summarize, whenever you have x added by 2, we subtract. That's the opposite of adding by 2, both sides. Now, when we have x subtracted by 4, the opposite of subtracting is to add both sides. What's the opposite of multiplying by something? The opposite of multiplying something is now to divide both sides. And lastly, the opposite of dividing both sides then is to multiply both sides. Now that's how you solve a one-step equation.